the last few years have been good for papyri of Greek tragedy. Here's one published in 2012 from Euripides, Ino, Pioxy 5131. Another one from Sophocles' Tereus, published in 2016, another Oxyrhynchus papyrus, 5292. And here's another one from, also published in 2016. While I'm talking, you can start to transcribe it. It's not very difficult, this one, as you can see. This big, beautiful papyrus is various hypotheses, prose summaries of Euripidean plays published by Chiara Macchiariello in 2016, and giving us one column on Dictys, another column on Danae, two lost plays, and we have a full, very detailed plot summary, giving us a lot more information about Euripides' plays, but also about how they were summarized in antiquity. The papyrus we're going to look at today, though, is not... oh, wow, you've got one there as well. Well, there's no excuse for you, sir, not to be able to transcribe them. I'll be looking for your opinion a bit later, so, you know, no pressure, no pressure. We're going to, for the papyrus we're looking at today, this is not an Oxyrhynchus papyrus. It's not been sitting in the former Ashmolean Museum in Oxford for decades, waiting to be published. This was discovered on the 19th of November, 2022. We have a precise, I don't know if it was the morning or the afternoon, that's not actually stated, but that's a pretty accurate, a very precise date for the provenance of this wonderful document. And it's from the Fayum, this great oasis, some way a little bit down the Nile, on the west side of the Nile, looking down at it to the south of Cairo. And if we zoom in a bit there, it's from the city of Philadelphia, obviously not the one in America, don't get confused with that one, I'm sure you won't. And as you can see from here, we're dealing with something on the edge of the Fayum near Lake Moiris that makes this such a wonderful agricultural territory in the ancient world, and between the Fayum and the Nile river valley. So lots of people traveling back and forth. This is an area that's seen papyri before. Those of you into documentary papyri will know of the archive of Zenon, discovered more than 100 years ago from a secretary to a great Ptolemaic official in the 3rd century BC. His archive was discovered here. We also have a tax collector from the 1st century AD, Zoilos. His archive was also found in Philadelphia. But there have only been substantial excavations here since 2017, where the site started being looked at in a proper and systematic way. So this, from one of the publications which has come out of that investigation, we see the settlements here, and here the necropolis, which is from where our papyrus comes. More precisely, it comes from this building here, a 2-room building with a colonnade from the 1st or 2nd century AD, which contained a couple of mummified burials, 2 women buried in this tremendous chamber. But also outside it, as you can see, various pit graves got dug, and the arrow in the bottom right-hand corner of that is pointing to the tomb where our papyrus was found. And here it is. Here it is. Okay, that arrow is just pointing north. That's not pointing to anything important for us. But here is the magnificent manuscript itself, perhaps with 1 or 2 other little things that have not been published, but are not literary. Found, I should say, by an excavation led by the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities, and led here by Dr. Basim Gehad. Now, when this papyrus was discovered, noting that there was a literary text on the back, we'll be hearing about the front a bit later on, Dr. Gehad got in touch with a collaborator of his on another project, Dr. Ivona Trunka-Amrine of the University of Colorado, to get her expertise in identifying what this was. She determined on the basis of overlaps between the text and quotations of Euripides that we have from other sources, that this indeed was a text of Euripides. And as so happens, at the University of Colorado is a distinguished Euripidean scholar, Professor John Gibert. So these are the three musketeers who have put this great thing together, and I really can't underline enough what an amazing job they have done in obviously discovering this thing, working out that this would be a site of interest to investigate, but then to deal with it and to take it to publication in such a short space of time. So this is the front of the papyrus, which Professor McGing is going to be speaking about it later. I have to say myself, as I look at that, that's the real scholarship, is deciphering that, okay? I mean, you know, I wouldn't know what language that was, and I'm allegedly a professor of the language in which it's written. So, yeah, let's move on. I mean, this is a bit more standard. This is the big, beautiful papyrus which they were studying all of this time. So about a year into their studies, they invited the four of us present today and some other people as well to take part in a colloquium in the Center for Hellenic Studies in Washington, D.C. Exactly a year ago it took place. And this was ahead of the publication of the papyrus. We saw the editio princeps in draft. But it was a workshop attended by all these people here, some of you will recognize. And at least for me, my colleagues can speak for themselves, it was for me one of the most purely pleasurable experiences of my life, okay? And if I have many experiences like that in the future, then I will consider that an even happier and more blessed life than I have been fortunate enough to live to this point. To have 2 days in this wonderful venue talking about this magnificent text with colleagues, and to have all the context that you want, not only on the other side of the papyrus, but from Dr. Gehad, the archaeological context and so on. A magnificent experience, and I should say, as someone most of whose time goes into studying Sappho and Alcaeus at the moment, somewhat different from the experience that we've had with some papyri of Sappho, but that's for another talk. Okay, it's just wonderful. It came from here on this particular day, and here's the archaeologist who discovered it. That's a very nice feeling to be talking about a papyrus in these terms. So, okay, what's on it? Well, I'm sure many of you have already transcribed some of it as I put it up just for a couple of minutes, but let's get a bit more. We've got 37 lines here from Euripides' Ino. There's no title to it. There must have been text in a preceding column, but it overlaps with quotations from Ino found elsewhere. And there we have the title Polyidou of Polyidus, from Polyidus, Euripides' play Polyidus, and then the rest of it, another 60 lines, is all from that play. And again, we have overlap with Euripides' Polyidus. There is also a quotation which is an overlap with Euripides' Ixion, which goes to show that sometimes these attributions can be wrong. Okay, but that's just a wrong attribution. It's clearly from Polyidus, as we now know. So we have, therefore, the good fortune that these are two lost plays. I mean, imagine if we got this and it was, you know, I don't know, Bacchae and Helen. I don't know, send it back into the... No, we wouldn't do that. But you know what I mean. Just having... there was no law of the Medes and Persians that said that it had to be two plays that we didn't actually have. Okay. So we can be thoroughly grateful, and we might think a little bit about why these plays might have been chosen as we go through this. But to say a little bit about these two plays by way of introduction, first of all, Ino. She becomes deified as Leucothea when she throws herself into the sea in distress at what's happening, what happens to her. We have a full account of this play from Hyginus, now the Roman mythographer. Now, let me back up just a little bit on this. We're very careful about nowadays just sort of plucking a myth from Hyginus, saying, well, this vaguely corresponds to something not a million miles away from the Greek tragedy, therefore Hyginus is summarizing this tragedy, and we can rely on it completely in this way. Okay, we're a bit more careful about that nowadays. However, this is one of two summaries for which he actually says, and I've actually taken it off the text, it's because, please, come in. You've not missed anything. It actually begins, Euripides I know. Okay, Euripides I know. And he only does, or our text of Hyginus only does that twice. And the only other example is from Antiope. And there, very nicely, we have a papyrus of Antiope, and it corresponds to some precise details within that summary of Hyginus, which Hyginus himself is saying is from Euripides' play. Okay, are you with me? So on that basis, provisionally, we accept this as an account of Euripides' play. Of course, there's going to be more to it. Of course, there's always the danger that something's been misrepresented, but we're in a different level of things from if it was just we're just matching up on the basis of the title alone. To look at the other Euripides I know papyrus, which I was referring to earlier, came up in 2012. And I mean, that one, I would have called that a big, beautiful papyrus when it came out, actually. Okay, I mean, that's just a load of stuff, you would think. I mean, that's what I mean. 97 lines is just incredible. Let's zoom in a bit on that and look in the margin. We've got Athamas, and then we've got a beta. And down here, we've got traces with Ino, and then a bit of an alpha. Okay, this is used to indicate the actor who's going to be playing the parts. In other words, this was a text that was used in some kind of performance. Okay. 3rd century papyrus, they're still performing Ino at this point. And we don't just have papyrological evidence for continued interest in Ino, we also have it in the secondary tradition. So we have Plutarch referring to Ino speaking in the theatres. Okay, this is the only time that he refers to a tragedy actually in performance in this way, rather than just citing it. Just as we hear Ino speaking in the theatres. Okay, he's conceptualizing it from that point of view. We also have something in Philostratus' Life of Apollonius, referring to a fictional performance that took place in the 1st century AD, but also a performance of Euripides Ino. Okay, well there we are. We've got 3 pieces of evidence. Count them. Okay, that's more than enough from where I'm coming from. This was a play that was still in the repertoire. Very, very unlucky that we don't have it today. Very, very unlucky. It gets as close as you can to being saved without actually making it. Now, Polyidus, that's much less well known. I'm not going to go into the twists and turns of this plot in great detail, but suffice to say it involves a seer who King Minos gets to, first of all, discover the whereabouts of his lost child. It turns out the child has died by falling into a vat of honey, as you do. And having recovered the body from the vat of honey, Minos then forces Polyidus to bring the child to life. And he shuts them away into a chamber, and then Polyidus, a snake comes, he kills the snake to prevent it from wounding the dead child, but then another snake comes and brings the other snake back to life. And on the basis of this, he then uses this knowledge to bring back the child to life. Okay, so that's the broad outline of that particular story. Hard to get pictures for this one. This is apparently the only representation of it in ancient art. As it happens, it's from not far from here in the Bloomsbury Museum around the corner, whatever it's called. Some of you may have been there, and we can see here, if we zoom in on this, okay, we see a snake at the bottom, see, okay? And then zooming in, we have, trust me, that says Polyidus, and that says Glaucus, the name of the child. Okay, we'll come back to this cup at the very end, if I have time, 15 minutes. Yeah, I think we will. So anyway, that's overview of these 2 dramas. The Editio Princeps was published in August 2024. Let me say again, discovered late November 2022. In less than 2 years, they organize a workshop and circulate their ideas. They don't just do an Editio Princeps, they publish an Editio Princeps, and they get it out in this way. I mean, really, they cannot be praised enough for the way that they've done this. It's a really great Editio Princeps, and there are cases of these papyri, as you know, they're discovered, and then decades go past, okay, and they're not published. Okay, there are some great stories, but I won't go into them in this context. So anyway, fantastic that they've done this, and it provides a great basis for future work. Naturally, it doesn't mean everything is right in it. If your editio princeps is 100% right and there's nothing in it, anything would change, you've spent too long doing it. Okay, you spent too long doing it. So knowing when to let go is also very, very important in this kind of thing. If I dissent from or put forward a different view in what is to come in one or two places, that is in no sense to be taken as criticism, not least as because I'm checking every journal now for when my own particular positions are going to come in for criticism and correction myself in due course. That's how this works. So we're going to go through the text very, very quickly. I'm going to show you literally just show you the Greek and then show you the translation afterwards. But just to give you an idea of the shaping, this is Ino. Okay, now Ino, we're missing the very left-hand column. Okay, it's kind of the perfect papyrus from that point of view, at least from my point of view. I mean, if you have the full column, that's much less interesting, okay? The second column for me is much less. The first column, we're missing, 3 to 4 letters or so. Oh, beautiful. I mean, if it's 1 letter, that's too easy. If it's 15 letters, well, I mean, but 3 or 4 letters, well, that is what I'm on this earth to do, okay? That's what it's all about. So, okay, we can, this is from the editio princeps, and in other words, solvable problems here, solvable problems. I should have said, some of it is indented that way. That's some choral bits. So some choral lyric, lines 3 and 4, choral lyric. This is choral lyric. This is choral lyric. Okay. Then we have a section here. All of this is quoted in other sources. Okay. Stobaeus, collecting proverbs. We know there's a line missing because there's an extra line in Stobaeus, and in fact it doesn't make sense without that line. Okay. And then this is the end of it, missing on the left, and it's sort of fading out on the right with many of these lines as well. So in terms of a translation, and this is the translation of the editio princeps. Things have moved on in some respects in this, but obviously not going into detail on those most of those points now. The first editors identify, and I believe they're correct, as I think did. I don't remember anyone dissenting from this at the workshop, but you'll hear people from that in due course, that we're dealing here with Ino's vaunting after Themisto has killed her children. Okay, remember Themisto, according to Hyginus' summary, was intending to kill Ino's children, but Ino does a switcheroo, and as a result, Themisto ends up killing her own children, and now we have some commentary on them. We see in the chorus talking about the age-old customs of mortals, not revering taking pleasure in 2 beds. Well, this is Athamas. He's had 2 wives. He thought he could juggle this and whatever, and it's not ended up so well from him. Then there's the question, the word no is restored and is actually disputed. Is there silence within the house, or is there not silence within the house? Arguments can be put for both. Okay, let's leave that one aside for now. And then we move on. Some more general comments below. We get, according to the first editors, Ino attacking somebody else, and then a lot of texts where the papyrus is quite scanty, and then some generalized comments at the very end. I want to focus in for a few moments on the very end of the Ino section here. Let's zoom in on that. You might see on that side of it, okay, we're missing stuff here because the papyrus is not extant, but on the other side, we're dealing with very faint traces, which are basically left as dots by the first editors. And I think actually we can wring some sense from this, and I'm just going to take you through 3 of the lines. So something, well, that's probably phone sacranta. You're speaking things that are not going to be accomplished. Power, stop, and then, okay, whatever. Onesas, megalodalgus, so someone benefiting and greatly harming me, and then something, fool and a fool, whatever. Okay, well, let's see what we can do. Well, the middle line is, I think, fairly straightforward. Or smekron esas megalodalgunas eme. Okay, the epsilon can be restored quite confidently, and in terms of that as a formation for a line, we get that very commonly in Euripides. Okay, using the participles as vocatives in this way. Also with the smekronesas, smegalodalgunas, that balancing, we see that in the Alcestis passage there, where they correspond rather than contrast, but it's the same principle. And also the contrast between onesas and algunas, we find that in a contemporary text. That's pretty straightforward too. Now, this is where things get a bit more difficult. So, fornes acranta, power, dum da dum da dum. We're missing out these syllables at the end. So, okay, well, what we've got here we've got power. This is the same, by the way. That's infrared and that's normal. Okay, so infrared on top, and the infrared is actually the better one. So we've got power then, but then they just give a load of dots. And in July last year after the conference, because we didn't really get into this at all, and I think, no, I think we can push this. I can push this. Okay. And it was very tough, and I promise I did eat and sleep occasionally during this period, but it was pretty much mainly the papyrus. And okay, so at the very end, we've got emoi. I mean, the epsilon is very clear. We've got that. The omicron isn't there, but we can see, yeah, okay, that's pretty straightforward. And that's what you've got to do. You've got to build in the letters from elsewhere on the papyrus, preferably getting a chunk of letters rather than just the individual letters, because obviously the spacing matters, and getting more than one, because this is a manual process. Gutenberg hasn't invented the typewriter, or whatever he did that he invented by this stage, so it's a manual process, so it's not going to be exact. Nevertheless, you want it to be in the right ballpark. Okay, so we've got emoi there. What about a bit earlier? Okay, we're already happy with the epsilon there. Mer, we might be able to see that eta in the infrared. Okay, eta lambda. We've got the left-hand stroke of the lambda is visible. That beautiful gamma alpha. Okay, look at that in the well, actually, you can see that quite clearly in both the way it goes down. It's hitting the alpha, just the alpha continues on for a bit to the top. Okay, you're looking very closely about how do these letters interact with, and then that's the one that came to me at 3:05 in the morning in mid-July last year, because everything was working apart from this, where there seemed to be only space for one letter, and I wanted two, and then I saw that actually the lambdas in this hand, they fold under each other, and so they take up less space. Then egal, on those you just find as many combinations as you can, and then the whole thing is very simple, power me legal emoi. Stop, don't say anything more to me. Okay, I'll take my own advice and move on to the next one. So Napier, right, matas. Okay, what have we got here? Well, let's have a look at that. Okay, and that in the non-infrared, what we have here is alpha hitting iota. Okay, see how high it hits the iota? Okay, and once you recognize that, it's somewhat counterintuitive, but once you recognize that's what the hand does, then it's simple, because that letter here is very clearly not rho but phi, phi there, and here's phi alpha iota there, and then the whole thing is quite simple, nepiu daphimatos, and from foolish blood, okay? And I mean, that's just, you know, give me a trimeter that doesn't end with aphimatos in Euripides. I mean, they're all over the place. I mean, you know, it's a thing. And what about the start of the line? Well, if you look there, they put dots before the men, but actually we can do better than that. The oi is, you know, you've got the mu on the end, but before that you've got iota, omicron, iota. That's pretty straightforward. You've only got a trace before that, but it's a trace that's consistent with pi. Okay, on that bit there is consistent with pi. I do want to fly out and check one or two things where I don't have full confidence on other things, but the image that we've got are decent for what I'm going over today. Well, that indicates or nepiu oimen nepiu daphimatos, O fools, and from foolish blood, which is an eminently Euripidean way of going about things, or filterteke, filston moistoma, where you have the same adjective, the same word used twice in corresponding clauses, the second one introduced with a de. We also have this from Hippolytus, where he is doing this kind of invocation first and then asking a big question. Oh, I should say also, you then fit them in on the side. These are the three that I've got here, and they're all in the same ballpark. Okay, it's when you find one is jutting out and the other, you want them next to each other, you want them to be close to each other, otherwise you can eliminate the suggestion. This is my own translation, which is my own article. Anyone's interested, I can pass it on to you. Just get in touch or get in touch with the society, I'll pass it on. I'm going to zip through to this very last bit here, like the Hippolytus passage. O fools, and from foolish blood, why in vain do you toil, knowing nothing? That makes sense. We have here, these are marks that I've put in, because we're missing that left-hand column. We'll see a moment in the Polyidus fragment that these are used to separate extracts from each other. Okay, a normal straight line is speaker change. A straight line with a line coming out of it is end of one extract, beginning of another. Okay, and so I put these in on the basis of this. These have therefore no probative value in themselves, but we can see here, in terms of the context here, this is not a continuous text. And I've tried to show that in the piece of mine that came out early in the year by literally going through every single exchange, one line to the next, and say, well, sometimes it definitely is continuous, sometimes it could be continuous, and then other times it plainly cannot be continuous. And I know, like the Polyidus one, is plainly not continuous. Now we finish with Polyidus in the 3 minutes I have left. So again, take you to the Greek. See the amount that's being quoted by other sources, generally Stabius. Okay, and this is an indication of where this text is coming from. There's a great paper by Donald Mastronardi, which you can find online on the Center for Hellenic Studies website. There is a page for this. If you Google the new Euripides, or if you chat it, or whatever it is you young people do nowadays, you will get to that page very quickly, and there are some wonderful papers there, among which is Donald Mastronardi on this text as a series of extracts, series of quotations, perhaps some kind of commonplace book, as it were, someone going through the text, taking out interesting passages from a particular play or a particular scene. Okay, so here with this one, we do have the paragraphoi, the horizontal strokes, and the horizontal strokes with the diagonal stroke. All of this is supposedly one long street of Polyidus, but we'll see in a moment. Sorry, I have to go over this quite quickly, but you know, that's life. We're going to focus in now on actually this section here, where if you said it like this in English, you sort of think this must be a continuous text, because that's what we tend to do when we are presented with a text of this kind. We're going to move over that, but let's skip on to that Greek. So these have got a line coming out of them. I prefer they're using the Unicode one, which is not so good for this particular effect. Now, it's quite clear from this that this is not a continuous text, and you can see this in two ways. For a start, as Chiara Macariello says in her splendid paper on the Euripides, new Euripides website, I give you her very words, the asyndeter. Difficult to justify individually, too many in too little space not to be suspicious, particularly the case here. I mean, suspicious, impossible, impossible. If someone can come up with a passage of Euripides when someone is doing that within a particular speech and is just leaving out the des and the als and whatever, as if this is the start of the 3rd century, okay, well, I'd like to see it. Apart from that, in the latest, a piece I was looking at only this morning, which is why my PowerPoint was so late, Mark de Cray's piece on the new fragment in the latest ZPE in the library upstairs. He also, from an independent point of view, and for good or ill, he's not influenced by my paper because his was clearly submitted before mine. He is happy, he is very clear that, as we had worked out on other basis, that the thought paragraphi are marking excerpts. Especially when one zooms out, he says at the end of the second paragraph, one has to admit that even Euripides did not produce monologues that consist exclusively of quotable thoughts, because that's the other big thing, that all of these rather sententious remarks, I mean, yeah, there are plenty in Euripides, but only that. Remember that sort of 7 lines of it in I know? Yeah, good luck with that. We finish with this. And this is thinking about getting back to that context and the question of why, which we discussed in the conference. We didn't sort out there. Perhaps we can sort it out this afternoon. This was found in the grave of, or near the grave of a child. You have the grave of a woman and you have the grave of a child. This is in the fill to the child's grave. So not just next to the child as we originally thought, but some distance away. So then the question is, well, does it have anything to do with the bearer of the child, or were they just putting in some paper at random that just happened to be this section of Euripides? And if it's not at random, well, why did they choose these particular plays? Okay. Now, both of these plays, Ino and Polyidus, deal with the death of a child, one or more children. Okay. So that's a possibility. That's even a possibility for why these were on the same thing at all. I mean, that could be a collection of extracts from plays dealing with that topic. We would need to have more plays in order to test that hypothesis, and we're unlikely to get any more of this manuscript. But I would just say that this cup, the only visual evidence that we have for the Polyidus myth, is found in the tomb of Sotades, which was discovered in 1890 in Athens, what is now central Athens, and consists of a series of just under a dozen very beautiful vases that it seems to be deliberately chosen for this, perhaps even commissioned for this particular grave, some of which seem to be dealing with issues of life after death, of defeating death. Eurydice appears on one of these. Then there's another myth which is about someone coming back from the dead. Well, that certainly would be very interesting with regard to this cup. Could we generalize from this? Could we say that actually the interest to the person putting this manuscript near the body of a child, it's not the Ino, let's forget the Ino. The question is Polyidus, and it chooses the bit that Polyidus because that's where the name is. Okay, it's got the name Polyidus. That's what you want, because Polyidus is the play in which the child comes back to life, offering some sort of consolation. That would make for a beautiful connection between this excavated object and the only other excavated object that we have to do with Polyidus. But then again, I must remember that I am a human being and we are seers of patterns, whether or not those patterns turn out to be reality. Thank you very much.